So in this video, I'm going to show you how to apply to a PhD in Denmark. Now, full disclosure, I've never actually applied to a PhD in Denmark, but I have applied to a postdoc, which I got, and I've also helped someone else apply to a PhD in Denmark, which they also got. So I feel like I have some credibility in the area at least, and so I think I can give some decent advice on how to apply to a PhD in Denmark. So first of all, the qualifications you need to start a PhD in Denmark is usually a master's degree. Now, I've seen multiple ads where this isn't actually the case, but I'm going to stick with that because that's the traditional way. That's what I know most about. You can apply to a PhD with only a bachelor's degree, where you have like an included master's degree in your PhD. But from what I hear, this affects the funding, and I'm not completely sure how the funding actually works for this, how much you actually get paid, if you get paid during your master's portion, or if you just only get paid for the last 3 years. I'm not sure. So in most cases, I think you're gonna need a master's degree to qualify to do a PhD in Denmark. The other formal requirement needed is the ability to speak English, and you usually need a certain score in English tests in order to qualify for the PhD. So first, let's talk about when to start applying. So I would start looking for a PhD position about a year out from when you want to start. I wouldn't start applying a year before, but just to get a feel for the market, how many PhD positions there are for your discipline, and to see what's out there and what you actually need in order to apply. And then about 6 months out, I would start applying. So most PhDs are posted approximately 3 months before the start date, but they will potentially push that date for you for up to 3 months if you are the candidate they really want. And so the start date is usually pretty flexible. Okay, so how do you find a PhD position in Denmark? So first, the most obvious thing, you Google PhD in your discipline, Denmark. It's probably not going to be the most efficient way to search for PhD positions in Denmark. So one website where I found my position, and I know they post multiple PhD positions, is the Nature Career website. So here you can just Google Nature Careers PhD Denmark, and you'll get all the PhD positions that are posted on that site pretty easily. Another place to look is the biggest job board in Denmark, which is jobindex.dk. They will have most PhD positions in this on this site as well. Also, you should probably have a look at each university's job bank. All the major universities in Denmark have their own job board. So if you go on those, you can search for a PhD in your discipline and you will be able to find them. And the major universities in Denmark are the University of Copenhagen, which is the biggest one. You have Aarhus, University of Southern Denmark, DTU. Those are the 4 biggest, I would say. And then you have the somewhat smaller, where you have Aalborg and Roskilde University. These also offer some PhDs, but I think they're fewer and not in every discipline. And then you have the business school, Copenhagen Business School, which also offer PhDs. And I think those are all the universities that actually offer PhDs in Denmark. I might be wrong here, but most of the PhDs are going to be at these universities. One thing I also wanted to mention is cold emails, cold emailing professors. Just cold emailing professors asking if they have PhD positions, that's probably not going to work out, because most professors don't just have money lying around for a PhD position without posting it. So if you are going to cold email professors, then I would ask them if they're willing to help you write a fellowship proposal or a fellowship application. If you do this, ideally you should have an idea yourself and then email professors who are experts in the area that your idea is within. But you can also ask them if they have any ideas for your fellowship application, And if they do accept this, they will help you write this application. And so I'm not going to go through how to write a fellowship application in this video. I might do that later on, but not in this video. Yeah, so I think those are probably the best places to find a PhD position in Denmark. So now you've found the position you want to apply for. And so what are the actual evaluation criteria for the position? So number one, in my opinion, is grades. Grades are probably the most important thing for being competitive in the PhD position market in Denmark. And here I would say, if you look at it from the American grading system, with the 4-point grading system, you're probably going to need a GPA of 3.5 or better from your master's. If you have very good grades from your master's, they might be willing to accept a lower GPA in your bachelor's, but it can't be too bad either. I think if you have much lower grades than a 3.5 from your master's, it's probably going to be difficult. That's what I think. And even though there aren't any specific formal cutoff, I think you're probably going to need to have a decent GPA to be competitive. Second thing on my list is the cover letter. All positions will require you to write a cover letter. And here I would focus on your academic experience and try to be as objective as possible. And when you make a claim, try to verify or corroborate this claim with an anecdote that describes when you actually did what you're claiming. Try to be as objective and as specific as you can be. Don't write how you've dreamed of being a scientist since you were 5 years old. I feel like that shows that you don't really understand what the position is all about. So what a professor is looking for in a PhD student is the ability to produce publications so that they can promote their own career. That's basically what a professor is looking for. And they won't care if you've dreamed of being a PhD or dreamed of being a scientist since you were 5 years old. What they want to know is, are you the most likely candidate to produce publications for them? That's just the way it is. You should focus more on being the objectively stronger candidate and write specifically why that is. Okay, so this is a postdoc application, but I think it's pretty much the same as for a PhD application. Of course, you're not going to have as much experience as if you've actually done a PhD, but you should still write about the experience that you have. And, the expectation is going to be thereafter. It's not going to be the same expectations for a PhD student as a postdoc, yet the application is probably going to be pretty much the same. So to start with, write why you're applying to the position and why you think you're a good candidate for the position. Then, now you write what is your experience within the specific area that they are looking for, that are relevant to the position. Finally, assuming that there is some teaching requirement or teaching tasks in the position, I would write something about why you want to teach. I think this is a pretty good cover letter, so if you follow a similar structure, I think that's probably the way to go. So now for the CV. So again, keep things as objective and as specific as you can. You want to make the CV easy to read. I just put my name at the top. I don't put CV. For an industry position, I would never recommend that you have more than one page. For an academic CV, they are weird. They're often very long. I would still try to keep my CV to one page and then add like publications and presentations on page 2 if you run out of space for that. It's fine for an academic position, but in most cases I would try to keep my CV to one page. So here is my CV, and I use bullet points, and I try to make this as objective and as specific as I possibly can. So I would put my education at the top when you're applying for a PhD position. If I was applying to an industry position, I would recommend putting your experience at the top. And then you put your relevant or academic experience. If you don't have that much relevant academic experience, you should definitely fill out with other jobs you've had. And then you can put honors and awards, languages you speak. And then, like I said, for the second page, you can put publications and presentations, although you're probably going to have a separate file specifically with publications and presentations. If you don't have any publications, that's fine. I think most people who start a PhD doesn't have publications, and that's fine. Especially first author publications. It's not that common for non-PhD students to have first author publications. And in my experience, if it's not a first author publication, it's difficult to assess how much that actually means, like how much you actually did for that publication. Personally, I have multiple non-first author publications where I didn't do that much on the project, and so in my opinion, it's not really worth that much. But you should definitely put them on if you have them. Other people value non-first author publications higher than I do. So those were the things to include on your CV. Now for the things I would advise against having on your CV. Most of the things I'm going to say are pretty common. Like, most people will agree with these, I think. Don't put personal information on your CV. That's my advice. Don't put your birth date. Don't put your citizenship or ethnicity. So I think that's pretty common advice in general. I know in some areas it's common to have like a skills section where you write all the skills you have. For example, in computer science, it's common to write all the programming languages you know and stuff like that. If you do have that, don't evaluate how good you are at those things. Don't have like a bar or something where you rate your ability within each skill. I think for most areas, you don't need a skills section. Like for chemistry, for example, I wouldn't put a skills section. A lot of people put like instrumentations like NMR, mass spec, things like that. I would advise against it. Everyone expects you to know that if you've done any organic chemistry anyway, so I don't think you're going to get much out of it. And then the final thing I don't put on my CV, even though it's common in Denmark and in many European countries, is to put a picture on your CV. Now, I'm from Norway, I did my PhD in the US, and neither of those countries put a picture on your CV. And I agree with that. It's just another way to discriminate. I would say don't add a picture, and I also see there are some Danish companies who write in their job ads, don't put a picture in your CV. So it's becoming more and more common not to do it. And I very much agree with that. Okay, so letters of recommendation. You're going to need at least one letter of recommendation or at least a reference that they can contact. Some will require more. I've seen some require 2, but maybe some even require 3. But I think it's most common only to require 1 letter of recommendation. And in my opinion, this is maybe the most painful one. I really don't like asking people to write me a letter of recommendation. You gotta do what you gotta do, and sometimes you just have to do it. In the US, it's very common, so it's probably less uncomfortable if you're American. And the obvious people to ask to write you a letter is your master's advisor, first and foremost. Second, maybe your bachelor's advisor. Academics who know you quite well. That's going to carry the most weight in a PhD application. But if the recommender asks you to write the letter of recommendation yourself and send it to them so they can send it. This happened to me when I was applying for my postdoc, and I will show you that here. This was quite painful. I did not enjoy writing my own letter of recommendation, but here it is. So my advice here is imagine what positive things your recommender would say about you. What is your relationship? How do they perceive you? and only write positive things. Don't add any negatives. That would be my advice. Just, yeah, it's not going to be comfortable, but here is an example that I wrote. I don't know if my PhD advisor actually changed anything before he sent this, but this is what I wrote. And like I said, here I just imagined what he might say about me. And of course, I angled everything in the most positive way possible. Okay, so proof of language skills. I've seen some exemptions from this, and I think almost always you're gonna be exempt if you're from a native English-speaking country. You're also probably gonna be exempt if you have a degree from an English-speaking program. I've also seen that some programs exempt people from the Nordic countries, along with a few countries from Northern Europe, specifically the German and Dutch-speaking countries, and also some exempt everyone from the EU. So if you have a degree from an EU country, you're exempt in many cases. Otherwise, you're going to have to take an English test, like the TOEFL or the IELTS. I have taken both the TOEFL and the IELTS. And since the TOEFL is the cheapest, I would probably recommend that one. Purely based on the cost. They're still pretty expensive in my opinion, but what are you going to do? And the requirements I usually see are 83 for the TOEFL test and 6.5 for the IELTS test. I would say those are not that difficult to get. You should probably try to get as high a score as you possibly can. I don't know how much it matters as long as it's above the cutoff, but you're probably also going to be evaluated on your English in your interview. But you should definitely do as well as you can on these English language tests. There are many tutorials on how to do these tests well. I think the best advice I found on the TOEFL test was for the speaking section, where you just pretend that you are stupid. Just don't have any critical thought, just decide on an opinion and just stick with it and speak with absolute confidence and no wavering in your opinion whatsoever. No nuance. Do not add any nuance. This is what the speaking section wants, apparently. And it worked out pretty well for me. Because I actually took the test twice, and the first time I scored 22, which is below the cutoff for most American universities, because I just went and I took it, because I thought, well, my English is probably good enough, so I'm just gonna go and take it. But then I scored 99 out of 120, which is 1 point below the American university's usual cutoff, which was kind of annoying. So I had to take it again. And then I found this advice, just pretend that you're stupid. And it worked out pretty well. For the speaking section, I would say, no, for the listening section, my main advice is don't space out. Just try to stay focused throughout the entire thing, and it shouldn't be too difficult. You just need to remember all the shit that they say in this text, in the test. And for the IELTS, I don't really have any great advice, but there's probably lots of great advice out there. So now you've done all the formal requirements, all the requirements for the application. And so if you are selected, if you're shortlisted, then you get an interview. And this is where the difference is made, basically. Everything up until now is like just determining whether or not you make it to the interview. But the interview is where the actual selection is going to be made. So before the interview, try to find as much information as you can about the professor before you go there. So look at their website, look at some of their publications, especially the top ones, and especially the ones that are related to your subject. They're probably going to have publications that are pretty close to what you are, the project you're going to do. And so you might get questions about this. Now, it's likely you're going to have to do a presentation about your work that you've done in your master's. And it's probably going to be a short presentation. It's probably going to be around 10 minutes or something like that. My best advice for this is to find someone and practice. Practice a lot, and the more senior this person is, the better. Like, if you have a PhD student or a postdoc in your group that is willing to listen to you, that would be my my best advice, is to ask them to have a look at your presentation and give you advice on both your slides and your actual presenting, both the content, your slides, and what you're actually presenting, the way you're presenting. Also, try to keep it short. Try to keep it, like, you're probably going to be given a specific time frame you're going to do the presentation in. I would err on the side of short rather than long, because you quickly get bored when you're listening to this kind of presentations. Like, you quickly get, if it's too long, people start to space out and they get bored. And yeah, so keep it on the shorter side rather than the long side. Don't try to be fancy and use big words to try to show off in some way. Professors are gonna pick up on that. Probably not gonna like it. Be prepared to answer some technical questions, especially related to the topic you're going to be researching, and read publications that are on the topic that your work will be on. Also, have some questions prepared to ask them. So, to some extent, you are also interviewing them, depending on how many options you have. If you really want the position, you should try to be as likable as possible, but you should definitely be asking some questions. And the questions I would be asking is about social activities within the group, what the group composition is like, and how many members of the group there are. Also, try to find out if they have local students. If they don't have any local students, that might be a red flag, because if they have a bad reputation, then local students will stay away from them, whilst foreigners won't know if they have a bad reputation. It's not guaranteed that that's the case, but it's definitely a possibility. Also, ask about expectations for work hours. Some professors will expect you to work long hours, and in my opinion, that's also a red flag. Also, be aware, professors can straight up lie. This is one of the reasons you should try to find out as much about them as you possibly can before the interview. I know of professors who have straight up lied about the number of group members they have and group composition and things like that. One professor I know of told a prospective PhD student that he had like 9-10 group members. When she actually showed up, he had one. And so be aware that professors can definitely lie. But yeah, like I said, if you really want the position, the most important thing is that they like you, because ultimately they're probably going to hire the person they like the most. That's often how it is in all interview situations in reality. But I also would say the advice I've given here will apply to a lot of other European countries, and I think some of it, at least, is pretty good advice in general. But like the academic system and the application process are going to be pretty similar for all the Nordic countries, and probably for like the German-speaking countries as well. And so I think this won't be necessarily specific to Denmark, the advice I've given so far. But that's all I have for this video. But if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one.